Hello, everyone. It's Phil Lee returning with another episode of Civil War Chat. Today is Thursday, the 12th of January, 2023. I think we've got the Lee Jackson Day coming up in Lexington, Virginia this weekend. Anyway, if it's not this weekend, it's pretty soon, celebrating their birthdays. And I understand from the Sons of Confederate Veterans up there that they have sold out both their breakfast and their luncheons. So that looks good. Click on the subscribe button here below to subscribe to future episodes, and also that notification bell in the far upper right. And if you do that, then when Groundhog Day comes around, you're not going to have to worry about repeating the day over and over like Bill Murray did. Okay, so today's topic is motivations for emancipation, North and South. Should a student mention that in January 1865, Robert E. Lee urged that Black volunteers be enlisted into the Confederate Army, quote, without delay, close quote, and be granted emancipation for their service, to be followed by a, quote, well-digested plan of gradual and general emancipation, close quote. Her professor is likely to dismiss this comment as a suggestion born of desperation near the end of the war. Such a response, however, overlooks the fact that Abraham Lincoln was at least near desperation when he settled upon his famous Emancipation Proclamation on September 22nd, 1862. Okay, so both were kind of facing the same situation. One, we don't, the historians don't credit Lee with seeking emancipation, but they credit Lincoln with doing it, even though both had the same motivation. Both were essentially desperate, given the conditions of the war at that time. Now, the Confederate Congress took more than 2 months to act on Lee's suggestion. Lincoln did not have to wait for his Congress because he was sufficiently desperate or lacking in respect for the USA Constitution to adopt the Emancipation Proclamation by executive order. Davis was more respectful of congressional powers, as demonstrated earlier in that same year when he waited for Congress to pass a Conscription Act authorizing a military draft. About 2 months before the Emancipation Proclamation of Lincoln, and shortly after Lee drove McClellan's Napoleonic army away from Richmond at the end of the Peninsula Campaign, President Lincoln met privately with War Secretary Stanton and Navy Secretary Wells on July 13th, 1862. He was actually in a carriage with them to attend a funeral for an infant child of Stanton's. He told them, quote, he had about decided that we must free the slaves or be ourselves subdued, close quote. They were startled and asked him for time to ponder the idea. He replied that they should do it quickly, quote, because something must be done, close quote. Now, 3 weeks before the proclamation, Attorney General Edward Bates recorded that Lincoln appeared, quote, almost ready to hang himself, close quote, at a cabinet meeting only a couple of days after General Pope had been routed at the Battle of Second Manassas, which was only 30 miles from the White House. Now, that's only 3 weeks before the Emancipation Proclamation. Only 9 days before the Emancipation Proclamation, Lincoln told a visiting group of Chicago abolitionists that he had arrived that had arrived in the White House on September 13th, 1862, to urge emancipation. Quote, I view the matter, meaning emancipation, as a practical war measure to be decided upon according to the advantages or disadvantages it may offer to suppress the rebellion, close quote. He even admitted that he had no, quote, objections of possible consequences of slave insurrections and massacre, close quote, that emancipation might cause in the South. Let me let that sink in. He was ready to adopt the Emancipation Proclamation over any objections that it might cause slave uprisings in the South when there were when there was a shortage of male family members in the South to defend the women and children from such an uprising. And as some of you may recall, Turner's revolution, Turner's uprising in Virginia in 1832 resulted in about 60 whites being massacred by black slaves. Most of those whites were women and children. So this is something to consider here. Lincoln is not, he is explaining to these abolitionists his thinking on emancipation and why he would do it, and he's saying it would be of a military necessity. But beyond that, he says, look, I'm aware that some people say that if I did emancipate the slaves in the South, it could result in a slave uprising that would result in possibly a slave, the deaths and massacre of women and children in the South. If such an event were to happen, it would not be enough to deter him away from announcing Emancipation Proclamation. Now, that's something that I don't recall ever seeing a major historian mentioning that in any of these online forums or in their Twitter feeds or anything like that. They don't get into that. That's not something they want to talk about. Okay. Now, look, to understand what was going on during this period, get a copy of this book, The Confederacy at Flood Tide. I think it's $28 at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. If you'd like an autographed copy, it's $32 from me. I'll cover the postage. Just email me, Phil_Leigh, L-E-I-G-H, at me.com. Okay, that is our show for today, and I want to thank you for watching. See you next time.